Hello, folks. Welcome back to Lady Vinyl Gaming, here for our illustrious story hour. Um, Thank you for being here. For those of you who are new, Story Hour is about an hour-long stream where we do a choose-your-own-adventure kind of visual novel kind of game. I attempt to do the voices. They're not always great, so please be lenient with me, but I try. You know. Um, so yeah, when we had last left off with this was the end of Vampire the Masquerade. Where is it? Shadows of New York. Yes, we had done Shadows of New York. Um, the next one in that set of games uh, has graphics that honestly just look like a book, and I don't mean a picture book. I mean a book, like a boring book. Um, so I have reached out to some friends of mine who are coming up with graphics for me. Once that is done, though, we will move back to there. Right now, we're going to be picking up with a game called Werewolf the Apocalypse. It's created by the same folks who had created Vampire the Masquerade. Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, and something about Changelings. I don't know what the full title of it, but those three games are actually all set to run together, or however are needed. But the rules are made so that you could have characters from each of those games playing together. So that's why I did a deeper look into what the Vampire the Masquerade folks had put together as far as their graphic novels go, and found Werewolf the Apocalypse Heart of the Forest. So that's where we're going to go. Uh, this is an actual new game. I have not played Werewolf itself. I have seen werewolf characters interacting within Vampire the Masquerade stories, and it can definitely be interesting. Um, but this will be a new adventure for both you and I. If you, this is the first one. This is the first episode that I'm doing. Uh, However, this will appear on the YouTubes, on my YouTube's channel, probably right afterwards. I'm usually pretty good with getting this up there. Um, so if you like it a lot, or you know somebody who would like it, but just 5 p.m. on a Tuesday just doesn't work for them, feel more than uh, you're more than welcome, rather, to share the YouTube channel. And all of the Story Hour episodes are existing there. So you can watch or listen to Vampire the Masquerade Shadows of New York or Coteries of New York at your leisure. So let's get into this game. Prologue. Premonition. Tutorial. This game is about rage and how it helps us do things that need to be done, as well as things that we later regret. Sometimes both. How do you feel about that? I prefer to think before I act. Especially because this is a book, so it's a lot easier. Your rage is low. So you're the observant and cutting type. That's okay. There's no right path here. Just your decisions and their consequences. Let's just follow the path and see where it takes us. The forest. The woods are full of stars. They flicker. Come closer. Run away. They want me to chase them. To play hide and seek. They dance around the tree trunks, float up on the gusts of wind that shiver through the branches, disappear among the leaves. I hide, but they bunch up and fly toward me like an arrow. Rushing down, they're soon upon me. But just before the spear of light pierces my breast, they disappear, and the dark of the night returns. In the darkness, the spirits keeping the forest alive whisper about the enemy. I begin to move unnoticed, one with the night, and then I wake up. Confused, I open my eyes. The forest around me is thick, dark, and reeks of decay to such an extent that it's hard to breathe. I know this place. I've been dreaming about this forest since I was a child. The tree trunks, wrapped tightly in dark-leaved ivy, are covered in ripples of lichen when the vines haven't taken hold. The thorny leafless bushes at their base are overrun with nettles. The fungi radiate the ghoulish, sickly green light. Dark, sponge-like mushrooms cling to the fallen trees. I take a deep breath and suddenly realize that it's not the forest that smells so foul. It's me. I look down and see my hands covered in a dark substance. I'm naked. A sticky, glistening film of a sticky, glistening film of liquid is clinging to my skin. I can feel it on my face, in my hair. Blood. Nature is never quiet. The leaves rustle in the wind. Small creatures scuttle in the undergrowth. There is a whisper. I don't understand what it means, but the word resonates in my head. Garou. Who said that? There's a severed head right in front of me. The face is contorted, the eyes bulging, the mouth open, the tongue stuck out. It's obscene. I feel bile rising in my throat, and I start to retch, and then eyes open in the darkness. I can see their silhouettes, shades of jet black against the darkness. They smell of fur and moss and bloodied earth. Massive creatures, some with horns, some with antlers. Their eyes burn like small fiery windows into hell. Their eyes burn like small fiery windows into hell. I look at them, and something wakes inside me. They tell me stories of their lost battles and dying hopes, and I say, no. I tell them my stories of the enemy and how they are so stupid, so clueless, that we almost feel pity as we kill them. They listen and laugh. I laugh with them. In a moment of clarity, I almost understand what the forest wants from me. And then I wake up. Chapter 1. Arrival. Hey Snorlax, I'm sorry you're having a bad time with Fall Guys. Not exactly my game, so I get you on that. Maya? Maya! Maya, wake up! I opened my eyes. My neck was stiff. I stretched lazily as I assessed where I was out of the corner of my eye. I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was in a bus. The sun streaming through the windows was making it hard to see. The girl next to me was touching my shoulder, disturbed. Nothing like a power nap, I laugh. She looks at me skeptically. You were laughing like maniacally. I blinked. The memory of the dream was still there, and the taste of blood in my mouth. I looked outside. Trees were pushing up against the narrow road, their boughs tangled, their trunks carpeted with moss. It was the forest from my dream. We're almost there, said the girl next to me. Her name was Anya. We'd met a couple of weeks earlier on the orientation day. She was from Norway, a tall, broad-shouldered, calm person who wore her long hair in braids. Somehow I'd managed to talk her into this crazy field trip across the land of my ancestors. Anya reached into her backpack and took out 2 apples. "I'm really happy we decided to come here," she said. "Yeah," I said, offering her some of the kabanusa, dried meaty sausages that were so much better than the original Polish ones back in the US. I was glad Anya had decided to come with me. I had problems keeping friends around and really needed one. "I did some searching," she said from her phone, "and this place is amazing. The last primordial forest in Europe." Our summer language course was starting in a few weeks, and I'd managed to talk Anya into skipping the tours of concentration camps and old churches and visiting Beowulf's National Park with me instead. I apologize to whoever named the national park. I probably mispronounced that. "So far it's beautiful," she said, her eyes smiling. "But why are we here again?" Why were we here? Why were we there? There being Balowez, a small village in northeast Poland, near the border with Belarus. It was famous for its national park, the very last European bison, and, according to a quick web search, occasional tensions between far-right troublemakers and the local Belarusian community. The most honest answer would have been, because I've been dreaming about the forest in Belarus since I can remember. But people didn't understand when I said things like that. I looked in her eyes. I looked her in the eyes. "I wanted to see the forest. I heard it was a must." That wasn't technically a lie. When I was little, my grandfather told me stories about an ancient forest full of wonders and the wolves that lived in it. It was all I got from that part of the family, before my mother took me, ran away, and cut off all contact with my dad. But I remember the story as well, and I remember the name of the forest. Puskazwa Balawaska. "This will always be our home," my grandfather used to say. Anya fell silent for a moment. "I think it's great that you come from such a magical place," she smiled. "The last ancient forest in Europe, thousands of years old." I wasn't sure if I was fond of that magic, but it was hard to ignore. And that was precisely why I needed to do something, anything, about my future, that damned forest, and my weird-ass family. I wasn't there by mistake. I'd planned this trip for months, with a clear goal in mind. My dreams, my grandfather's stories, the fact my family was from there. There were just too many coincidences. The forest wanted something from me, and it was time to find out what. But honestly, I had no idea what to expect. Welcome Home by Alawaz. Again, I apologize for the mispronunciations in this one. I, I'm trying. I'm trying. Belawaz looked like an overexposed photo of a village, with the contrast turned all the way up. It was a hot, sleepy day, on a hot, sleepy street, and everything, the old trees, the yellowed grass, the weathered wooden houses, the fences, seemed almost normal. Everything, except the shadows. They were sharp, as though they were freshly printed with the darkest of inks. For a second, I could have sworn they'd moved, but then I realized it was just a black cat walking down the sidewalk. When it saw me, it stopped in its tracks. Here, kitty kitty, I said, squatting and reaching toward the cat. It rammed me affectionately with its head and started rubbing against my legs, totally ignoring the outstretched hand. Hey Maya, Anya said, looking at me surprised. Didn't you say your friend would be waiting for us? But he wasn't there, and the cat was still staring at me. Let's go, Anya put on her backpack. I'm tired and I really need to find a toilet. For a moment, I was tempted to get out of the sun and worry about my missing friend later. I grabbed my backpack and started walking. I'll manage on my own, thanks for nothing, I muttered under my breath. Anya sighed with relief and followed me. Bed and breakfast. Baloise had a few hotels and hostels, but the preferred form of accommodation was bed and breakfast. I found one that was nice, clean, and that had good reviews. We had a room on the second floor with a huge window and a great view of the forest. We dropped off our stuff and freshened up a bit. Maybe we should have waited for your friend, Anya said, concerned. I shrugged. I'll find him sooner or later. Before you go, check out your character sheet. Look for it in the upper right corner of the screen. You can find a load of useful info about Maya, her background, personality, goals, and so on. You can also check who your friends and who your enemies are. Ah, here we go. Alright. Maya Borodich, 24-year-old student who's an American. No bravery, no inspiration. 1 in analytical, 4 in spiritual, 2 in cunning. She's healthy. She's trying to understand what connects you to the forest, pursue to regain willpower. Anya is sympathetic with her, and it's complicated with family. Okay. You notice also too at the top of the screen, we have 0 for rage. Rage describes your supernatural anger. Be careful when you rage. High rage allows Maya to overcome many obstacles, but also makes her aggressive and hard to control. We have a 2 in willpower. Willpower is a pool of points that you can spend to perform actions that are difficult for Maya. Particularly, willpower can be used to prevent the effects of high rage. You regain willpower when you pursue your goal. When your willpower goes down to 0, you are impaired and unable to perform hard mental and social actions. Health is 3. It's your life force. When your health goes down to 0, you are impaired and unable to perform hard physical actions. And this is where we are. It's summer already. Haha. Baloise was a quaint tourist town. Lay of the land. I had a clear goal in mind. The forest was calling me, and I was ready to answer. Into the woods. It was dark in the woods. Dark, humid, and chilly. The leaves didn't let through a lot of the light. Daniel looked at Anya and me over his shoulder. Hi, Sharkweekly. I don't know who this Daniel is. Daniel looked at Anya and me over his shoulder. Do you like her? We'd met maybe 20 minutes earlier. Oh, okay. Anya had Googled local guides, and he was apparently the best person to go to if you wanted to see the forest. So I found him. And now, here we were. Do you mean the forest? I asked. Polish was a strange language that gave the most unexpected genders to objects and ideas. I mean Puskaskas. He gestured towards us. The word sounded like the wind rustling in the leaves. Pushchaka. Push. Pushcha. Pushcha. Pushcha is the right word, not forests. Forests are like fields or orchards, cultivated. He spat as he said it. And Pushcha, she is older than even the concept of fields. He was using the word as though it was a name. I looked around with fresh eyes. I felt as though I'd entered an ancient tomb. Gigantic dead trunks were decomposing slowly around me, young plants and colorful mushrooms sprouting from them. The trees that still lived stretched toward the sky like columns holding up the vaulted canopy which blocked out all but a few rays of sunlight. There was stillness and there was movement, darkness and light. If spirits existed, that place would be swarming with them. Hey, Vamp Kitty. There should be more places like this, I said earnestly. Or more of this place. Daniel lifted his head and looked me right in the eyes. Yes, you're right, he said with a serious expression. He was a strange guy, slender but muscular, not the CrossFit type. It was more the kind of strength you get from working all day long in the open. His skin was weather-beaten and bronzed by the sun, like tanned leather, and he moved in a very deliberate way. But his fingers were slim and delicate, and his eyes were the strangest shade of yellow-green. Then I remembered why I was there. Oh, fuck it. Let's see what happens. There's a special reason I'm interested in the forest, I admitted. I'm not from here, I continued, but I think something secret connects me to this place. I dream about the forest a lot. Daniel stopped abruptly and turned to me, watching me for a while. His nostrils flared as though he were tasting the air. Yes. His face broke into a smile. I think our families might have known each other many winters past. Pushka still remembers. Come on, he started walking. I know exactly what you need to see. So I was right. There was something hidden in my family's past, and it seemed to have a lot to do with the forest. Every time you learn to do something significant that brings you closer to your goal, you regain willpower. Yep, we're full back up. With every step, I was getting closer to solving the mystery. So I followed him. At the crossroads. Well, we have to choose a path, he said. There's the old wolf den, or I could show you the burrows first. Or a clearing that some folks call a place of power. I like the idea of the burrows. Just one small thing. We started walking, but after a few steps, he stopped abruptly like he'd remembered something. Then he turned to me. Could you do me a favor, please? He asked. It depended. I don't know, I said. Why don't you tell me what you want first? He ran his hand through the moss on a dead tree trunk, smelled his fingers, and then reached into his pocket. He took out a small stone. I felt my fingers itch. The stone was valuable. I wasn't sure why I thought that, but there was something possessive about the way Daniel held onto it. The game tracks your decisions on how Maya approaches problems. They will accumulate and gradually reveal what kind of person she is deep in her heart. The story changes to reflect Maya's personality. I would like you to take this stone, he held out his hand open towards me, and throw it in the direction you think we should go. Okay, I said, reaching for the stone. I took the stone and closed my hand around it. Be careful, whispered Anya. It was warm, and I felt grounded when I squeezed it. I closed my eyes and thought about the Barrows, trying to imagine that place. I thought about the people who bury their loved ones in the middle of the ancient forest, and of the bodies nourishing it. I threw the stone. I felt my hand rising entirely on its own, and then throwing the stone as far as I could. When I opened my eyes, there was a path where the stone had fallen. I hadn't noticed it before. Okay, Daniel patted my back. Let's go. What just happened? I was confused. You were accepted, he answered with a faint smile before he turned to head deeper into the forest. The dead hills. The trail soon disappeared. Sometimes we walked along a barely visible path made by some animals. Sometimes we followed a stream or a gully, but for most of our trek, we walked through the dense undergrowth. Daniel was a great guide. He had no compass in hand, no map, yet we were heading dead north. We moved through the forest with grace and ease, like it was his backyard, and he was showing us around. It was a pleasant walk. There was always a path through the brambles. The ground was even, and the branches stayed out of our way. I almost felt like the forest wanted us to find the way. I watched the efficient and deliberate way Daniel moved, and I tried to guess his background. Why had he become a guide? Let's see if he picks up on the obvious that I'm evidently deciding to drop. Where are you from? I asked the obvious question. From around here. He made a vague gesture. Are you a professional guide? That's what I do for a living. He wasn't very talkative. Let him be, whispered Anya. Suddenly, it all came together. Suddenly, it all came together, and I realized what was so unusual about him. The way he moved. It was so natural, so effortless. No one who'd spent their childhood sitting all day at school or in front of a screen could move that way. Who are you, Daniel? I asked, bewildered. Were you raised by wolves or what? He looked me straight in the eyes, his irises a mesmerizing yellow-green. Yes, I was, he said with a poker face. Then he winked. Anya smiled uneasily. We'd been walking for a while when I noticed that Daniel's steps had become slower. He was also looking around more often and had hunched slightly. I sat down on a fallen tree trunk, looked around, and just enjoyed the afternoon. After a moment, Daniel shook his head. They're too tricky to find sometimes, he mumbled. Be quiet for a moment, please. That was when I felt it. Ash in my mouth, the smell of smoke and wet soil, and a pull. I think I know where to go, I said, surprised. He tilted his head. Okay, let's check it out. I pointed to the barely visible path to my left under a dying tree. He followed me, and I followed my feet, knowing exactly where they should go. Under the crooked tree, past the dead tree trunk and the sponge-like mushrooms, across the patch of wet, dark green moss, all the way to a place that didn't look much different than any other part of the forest, until you noticed the mounds. There was something about the flattened hills that drew my full attention. A memory stirred in my mind. No, it wasn't a memory. It was a feeling anchored in my chest, akin to the taste of ash in my mouth and the smell of smoke. Longing, sadness, resignation. A sense of sacredness. It filled me with a calm excitement, and when I closed my eyes, I saw a fire burning in the darkness. The village was long gone, its houses burned to the ground, its people slaughtered, but the spirits were still there. They had accumulated over time, some in ancient Roman armor, some in rags, some in animal skins, some in uniforms from the world wars, some in modern camo. Are we dead? Where are we? They asked me with frantic whispers. Is this hell? But they weren't real, just echoes of the past. The spirits in the trees were real. Hey, Seth. When I opened my eyes, Daniel was watching me. You were somewhere else. You said you had family here? I heard that my father's family came from here. I nodded. I don't know much about them, though. He sighed. I don't think you should be here, he said tersely. You're not ready. Why? What do you know? I wasn't letting it go. About you, not much. But I know the Puchka. The past is closed here. His eyes were worried as he looked at me. And if the Puchka calls to you, it's wise to listen. But it's not wise to get lost in the voices. Come. On the way back, I was lost in my thoughts. The voices in the vision knew what I had to do. It's almost as though it was expected of me. Daniel said the Puchka had called me. Was the vision showing me what the forest needed? I smiled. A bigger picture was finally starting to come to light. The Puchka wanted me to see her hidden side. In the shadows, I felt a little tired. The shadows of the enormous trees cooled the sweat on my skin. The taste of ash lingered in my mouth. So that was from the burrows. Let's try the wolf's den. The old den. The first thing I noticed when we stopped was a pine tree. A pine tree I knew. I remembered it. Small, twisted and crooked, with roots sticking out of the side of the hill on which it grew. I knew it was wise. Every bend of every branch held hidden knowledge that was waiting to be discovered. Months before that, when I decided to come to Poland, I dreamed of that tree. I was sure of it. Just like I was sure that under its roots I'd find a burrow, and a few feet away another one, like two dark eyes gazing at me as I approached. Daniel passed me and approached the tree. He pressed his cheek against the trunk. Hello, he said quietly. I looked around, but we were the only people there, so I remained silent. A sudden gust of wind threw a cloud of dust in my face and into my eyes. This is the den, announced Daniel, It's abandoned, of course, but still worth seeing. What happened? I asked. Humans happened, Daniel sighed. He sat under the tree, leaning his back against it. It was a hot spring morning when we found this den. No one knows who the men were, even though it was only one human generation ago. There were 6 cubs here, under the roots of this tree. He stopped stuttering, and seemed to enjoy telling the story. I enjoyed listening, and I enjoyed listening to it. There was something calming in his voice and the way he talked. His slow gestures and wistful eyes made me feel as though I was. His slow gestures and wistful eyes made me feel as though I was with the cubs on that hot spring morning. I don't think they wanted to hurt the wolves, he continued. They probably thought they'd been abandoned. That's why they took the cubs with them. Humans have this instinct that makes you try to befriend everything, especially if it's dangerous. You mean enslave, I answered sharply, pulling something from the world and forcing it to work for us. I hated it, but it was how it seemed to be. I'm not saying it always works out, but the intention is good, and I believe the men who kidnapped the wolves wanted to do something kind, he continued. Anyway, they took them. Out of the 6, 2 lived to see the cold summer that year. The wolf mother used to come to the farm they were at and howl. People went grey if they heard her. And suddenly, I heard that howl. I knew exactly how it sounded, and I felt despair and longing gnawing at my soul. I remembered how the cubs had reacted. Every time she came, we remembered what had been done to us. We snarled at our captors, knowing they deserved it all, deserved to go grey, deserved to die for keeping us enslaved there. Maya, are you okay? Anya asked, putting her hand on my shoulder. I just feel for the cubs. I know a little about divided families myself. Oh? Yeah, yeah, that usually ended the conversation. Daniel sighed, looking at the tree and the burrow. The cubs that survived were sold to some people in Hanjagnaka, but after a while both of them ended up in Balois with the scientists. They have a station in the national park. One of the wolves, Kazan, was a celebrity of sorts. If you saw any wolf photos from here, they were probably of Kazan. He was even on postcards. I wonder what happened to the mother. There's something missing from this story. I almost felt like she was more important than the story made her out to be. What kind of wolf was she after all that? That's a good good observation. She eventually stopped looking for her cubs. She came back to the forest and found new children. There was a slight gust of wind, and the tree creaked. I remembered that sound from my dreams as well. A sound that made me feel safe. And what happened later? I felt like I knew Daniel well enough to ask that. Is Kazan still alive? He lived for 8 years in the park. Daniel looked at me with his yellow-green eyes, until they let another male wolf into his pen. I held my breath. They fought over the she-wolf, and Kazan lost. Anya looked up from her phone. I've read about that. She sounded upset. They didn't notice he was wounded. It took him 3 days to die. Daniel shrugged. He lived a good life and died fighting. It was good. We fell silent. He looked at the burrows for a long time. This place is my friend, so I tried to keep it important and respected. I think it's my mission, you know? I think I understand. The forest had a way of sending people on missions. Daniel looked at the tree one last time. Goodbye. Goodbye, I repeated, and we left. Yeah, we have time. A buzzing in my ears. It started with the hair on the backs of my hand rising. The air around me seemed brighter, lighter. The leaves and tree trunks turned yellow, and my skin started to prickle. I realized that I couldn't hear anything except for a low buzzing that was filling my ears. I couldn't think. Words appeared and disappeared in my head faster than I could notice them. I had to do something. Snap out of it. I frowned. Stop! I said under my breath sternly. And for a moment, the buzzing did stop, though I wasn't sure if it was because of the words or because I was distracted by a shadow among the trees. A few feet from me there was a clearing. I could see the silhouette of a person moving slowly, deliberately there. The clearing was a plateau between huge boulders. There were double-trunked trees between the rocks, and an angular wooden construction that stuck out on the ground like a sore thumb. There was a bike leaning on it, but more importantly, there was a man, and he was moving in the most beautiful, harmonious way I'd ever seen. It was hypnotizing. I looked at him for a moment, at the way his muscles danced under his tanned skin, trying to trace his movements. Before every grand gesture, every stretch, every push, there was a micro-movement, an impulse from his core, but I could feel it was even deeper. The energy that had been filling me earlier took form. It was flowing in rhythm with his steps, with the flow of his hands. The words came out of my mouth, seemingly without my knowing. What did you do? He smiled. It's a bit complicated. He stretched his horns. He stretched his hand toward me. I'm Cornell, he said, a hard German accent. Well, I screwed up that accent. I'm Cornell. He had a harsh German accent. Shouldn't you be on the logging site? Daniel asked him after I introduced myself. I needed to center myself, he answered. The others are still there, don't worry. Wait, logging? Here? I couldn't believe my ears. He smiled bitterly. Yes, logging, here. That's why I needed to calm down. This place is special, Daniel said. Some people call it a place of power, as I told you. And they had good reason to, Cornell added. Look around you. I looked. It was a clearing filled with light. I could see Cornell's traces, a beautiful pattern on the ground. But there was one thing that caught my attention, more than anything else. Are these fruit trees? I asked, not quite believing my eyes. Here in the middle of the forest? Just noticing them made me feel a little more at ease. Yes, pears and apples. People believe this was a place of worship thousands of years ago. Hence the fruit trees, the stone circle, and now the tower. And indeed, there's a lot of energy in this place. You felt it, didn't you? Yeah, I felt it, I said without enthusiasm. The puchka is wounded and in pain, and it calls out in rage to anyone who can hear it. Here, this call is louder. You see the logging, his eyes darkened, is slaughter. Anya gasped quietly. Every priceless thing can be destroyed by greed. Logging is illegal, of course, but illegal is sometimes just a way of saying a bit more expensive, but still profitable, especially for huge corporations. The forest is hurt. The wound is getting bigger, as is its desperation. I frowned. Who's doing the logging? I asked calmly. If anything was to be done here, it had to be done in an informed way. Cornell regarded me for a moment with a faint smile. You have a connection with this forest, don't you? You should come to the logging site and meet everybody. Absolutely, Anya said eagerly. I looked him over for a moment. Hey, did any of you maybe have strange dreams about the forest before you got here? He looked at me, a look of concern in his eyes. As I said, you seem to be connected with the forest and very sensitive to the things that are happening here. Pay attention to your dreams, especially tonight. This place is known to communicate in that way. He jumped suddenly and looked at the wooden tower and the bike I'd noticed earlier. The Schwalbe is getting restless, he said. And as Daniel pointed out, I should be on the logging site setting up the protest. What is a Schwabel? I asked, confused. He named his bike Swallow. He loves it very much. Cornell grinned. Oh, I do. Nice meeting you, Maya. The moment he disappeared, the buzzing came back. It wasn't as strong as before, but it was there. All I wanted to do was get out of there. Okay. I think that's where we're going to leave it off for today. We've gotten through and gone through the forest and then learned a little bit about this story. I hope you had fun and you enjoyed it. For those of you who jumped in late or are just looking to hear more of Story Hours and the past Story Hours, we'll be going up on the YouTube soon. But until then, we will see you next time.